Hello, cruel world. My name is Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐝. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. The video you're about to watch is a clip of me being interviewed for the Please Eavesdrop podcast. I'll put the full link in the description below, and I'll be talking about Ronnie Kray, so my psychoanalysis of him. Very interesting dude. And also about psychopaths in general, including my explanation of what a psychopath is and another real life case of a psychopath that I've personally been involved in the treatment of. So I hope you enjoy all of that. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Until next time, peace, have a nice day, and do not forget, I love you.
You gave a mention to Ronnie Kray, I guess, as far as this, him being a schizophrenic, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting again because obviously him being so obviously well known and famous and stuff like that, him having that condition as well, and I guess manoeuvring through whatever he was doing with that condition is, as you said, it's pretty, you know, it's going to be harmful, I guess.
Yeah.
To, I guess, the onlookers and everyone else involved, sort of thing.
Yeah. So I think Ronnie Kray is unique for a couple of reasons. Well, actually, the Kray twins themselves are unique because obviously you've got two genetically identical people, but one of them has schizophrenia and one of them doesn't. So that in itself is really unusual. And they were both violent and both got done for murder in the end. So what's interesting about that is that I think they're both antisocial. So they both have personality disorders, as we were talking about before.
You reckon?
But on top of that, Ronnie had schizophrenia as well. And he was seen as the more unhinged and the more paranoid, the more dangerous out of the two of them.
Definitely.
But what's really another thing that's unusual about him is that most people, when they're paranoid and they're psychotic and they have things like schizophrenia, they will really struggle to function in life because they don't trust people, they can be violent, they end up in prison, they end up in hospital. But he's unique in that his job is to be violent and paranoid. So because he's a gangster, I think actually, I don't know if it helped him, I don't know if that's the right word, but he certainly could carry on.
In some instances, I guess it probably would help him.
I suppose it depends. If he's like extra sensitive and he can spot somebody who's about to like stab him in the back or somehow manipulate him, then that would be helpful. But I think from what I know about him, he would sometimes get paranoid about things that actually weren't happening. So he would think that somebody's insulting him when they weren't, and he would lash out and be violent towards them. So I think it's helpful to a degree, but if you're too psychotic, then you end up attacking people for no reason. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that an average normal person, if you or I smack somebody in the face or punch somebody for looking at us the wrong way, then maybe you get away with it once, but pretty soon somebody would call the police and would be in prison or at least arrested within days. Whereas if you're Ronnie Kray and that's what you and your brother do anyway, because you're celebrity hard gangsters, then people aren't going to go to the police, so he can get away with it, I suppose. Is what I'm saying.
I mean, even the fashion in which he murdered, because with Ronnie Kray, he murdered 𝐿𝐻𝐻, who was a part of the Richardson's gang from South London, I believe. Yeah. Him going into the pub and just shooting matey in the head, like that's pretty. I don't want to say nuts, but that's like
pretty gangster.
Yeah, well, it's gangster, but also at the time it's like, bro, like this guy he's a bit, you know, that's a bit nuts. Like,
yeah, it's quite unhinged, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I wonder what that was. I wonder whether that was his psychosis or whether it's his personality, or maybe both.
I mean, like he just literally walked in. I think 𝐿𝐻𝐻 said a couple of words, something like, "Oh, look who's here," sort of thing, and he just whipped it out and bang.
But the other thing I keep saying about how he's quite unique is that I wonder, and I think I talked about this in my video, whether his sexuality played into it because this is back in the 70s, right? So obviously homosexuality was a lot less socially acceptable back then. Yeah. And he is this hard gangster image. So I wonder, this is a lot of speculation here, I'd only really know by interviewing him myself, but I wonder whether he had this like chip on his shoulder to prove his masculinity because he was gay. So I believe that this guy, 𝐿𝐻𝐻, not that day that he got killed, but on a previous occasion had made a homophobic slur. Yeah. So I wonder whether that festered with him, especially with his paranoia and his schizophrenia. And he was like, you know, he has slighted me. I'm already, because of my sexuality, people are already judging me and I need to be this hard gangster. So I wonder whether that kind of added to his callousness, basically. And
then when you compare that to his brother, Reggie, who killed Jack the Hat, that was a bit more, I guess, emotionally driven because Jack the Hat pretty much mentioned his Reggie's late wife, I guess, Frances or whatever,
and then she committed suicide.
Yeah, and then he just basically was like sort of going in, and he was like, you know what, fuck it, pulled out the gun jammed, and he gets a knife, stabs him upteenth time, sort of thing. So that murder, I guess, is a bit more emotional and less sort of the schizophrenic sort of thing involved. Sort of thing.
So that seems like somebody who's probably antisocial, who's got a lifetime of offending, so probably doesn't really care about the law, probably doesn't really care about the consequences that much. But I suppose it's understandable, like what his crime makes sense because he
Exactly,
felt
my point.
slighted.
Yeah.
Whereas Ronnie's, I suppose it makes sense to a degree, but it's also it's too sort of high risk and flippant.
100% for sure. And okay, so that's schizophrenia. Now, also a mental illness as well would be a psychopath.
That is a personality disorder, actually, not a mental illness.
Right. It's not a mental illness.
So a psychopathy is all of the things I was talking about before about being antisocial. So just to quickly recap for your viewers, that's like being aggressive, impulsive, not caring about the rights of other people, not learning from your mistakes, all of those things, plus being really charming and deceitful and manipulative. So somebody who's antisocial, like your average sort of high-level drug dealer or a thug, isn't necessarily that charming. And they tend to live at the fringes of society, whereas somebody who's a psychopath is really good at fitting in. So everybody thinks they're normal, but they're really good at taking advantage of other people.
Have you seen the film Paid in Full?
Yeah, I think I have. Is that is it Wesley Snipes?
No, it's
New Jack
Wood
City,
Harris, it's Mekhi Phifer and the rapper Cameron.
Yeah, I have actually.
Are you familiar with the story at all? Of
remind me, I have seen it, but it was a long time
basically,
ago.
this is Harlem.
Yeah.
In the early 80s, I believe. You got 𝐭𝐫𝐲𝐝 Faizan, who's played by Wood Harris. Wood Harris's character, his name's Ace Boogie in the film.
Yeah.
And then you got Cameron, who plays a guy called 𝐿𝐴𝐿. They call him Rico in the film, right? So 𝐿𝐴𝐿 is the perfect example, in my opinion, of a psychopath.
Yeah.
As far as the explanation you gave in that video, like you said, being charming, there's one thing you said as well. They're quick to sort of drop their friends in a heartbeat just to sustain themselves, sort of thing. Because I don't know if you remember in the movie when he killed Rich Porter, like his best friend, like he killed him. If you remember that part.
I can't remember, no.
Yeah, so basically, just to sort of recap, Rich is a big drug dealer in Harlem. His little brother ends up getting kidnapped, Darnell Porter, and the people that kidnap him, they send him his little brother's finger in a McDonald's bag and a recording, like as an audio of them cutting the finger off while he's all screaming and shit. So it's crazy stuff, sort of thing. So he goes over to 𝐿𝐴𝐿 and he's like, I've got this bunch of drugs. I need to get my little brother back there, slowly killing him, and then at some point then 𝐿𝐴𝐿 just fucking kills him at that point.
What, kills his friend who wants his help?
Yeah,
Okay.
like killed Rich Porter.
For money?
I mean, or his position, because Rich was the man. Like he was running sort of things, isn't it? He was the go-to guy, and he had it. And 𝐿𝐴𝐿 sort of got brought in through Rich, but 𝐿𝐴𝐿 is this psychopath. He's like, yo, I'm trying to be that sort of guy, I guess, right?
Yeah. So I'm afraid I can't remember the details from the film. From what you're saying, it sounds exactly like a psychopath. So I suppose the difference between somebody who's just violent, because not everybody who's violent, even people who are very violent, are necessarily psychopaths. But somebody who's just violent versus a psychopath is that a violent person you'll know that there's something wrong about them, and they're always aggressive, and it's about their image and intimidating people. Whereas a psychopath is sneakier than that. A psychopath you won't necessarily be watching out for that person because you think that they're a normal sort of friendly person. They might even be your friend, but when the time comes, they'll just happily stab you in the back or even take life.
I mean, he had no motive to kill Rich. Like there's nothing in it, sort of thing. Yeah. And he was at, like I'm talking about Rich, he was at a point in his life where he was so vulnerable, and you did that to him. Yeah. That's fucking nuts. Eh? Like, I don't want to use that term. Something's clearly got to be wrong with this guy a little bit.
So I've worked with psychopaths, with like people that have been formally diagnosed with psychopathy in personality disorder units within secure units in these locked hospitals. And the one thing there's actually two things that really stand out working with psychopaths. Number one, they look so normal. So compared to the other people on the ward, some of them have been taking medications for decades. A lot of them are overweight, dribbling, that kind of thing, from the side effects of the medication. Crazy. Some of them dress quite street, whereas psychopaths... Quite street? Yeah. It's like sagging pants, baseball caps. Yeah. But psychopaths are not those things. Psychopaths dress actually pretty smart, and they blend in. And there's one person that I can think of specifically who eventually actually ran away from our unit. He was a formal psychopath, like he'd been diagnosed with psychopathy. Right. And I actually thought he was a member of staff because he was so sort of eloquent, well-spoken, well-dressed. I wasn't wearing a suit or anything, but he was wearing like a shirt and trousers. He's on a psychiatric ward. There's no reason for him to wear a shirt. Do you know what I mean? I didn't even realise he wasn't. For the first day, I thought he was a member of staff. They had just forgotten his ID. It was only later that I realised he was a patient. So that's one thing that really stands out is they fit in so well. Because they don't want to draw attention to themselves. They don't want to be somebody that's seen as trouble because they just want to get out of the unit as quick as possible. And number two, how quickly they can drop their friends. So when we've worked with psychopaths, and there's in these personality units, a bit like prison, I imagine. There's not imagine, I know. There's like hierarchies of these angry men that've got a history of violence. Sometimes they get on, sometimes they have beef, sometimes they have fights. But what I've noticed about psychopaths is they will easily switch alliance when they need to distance themselves from a friend. So, for example, I've seen this happen quite a few times. If occasionally people sneak in drugs to these units, as the same in prison. As the same as that happens in prison. So if like one person is suspected of having drugs and their leave is stopped, or they test positive on a drug test by one of us, one of the members of staff, the psychopath will just completely drop their friend, completely disassociate themselves, even if they've been mates for like years, because their friendship means nothing to him. It's just an opportunity. He's just using him for whatever, for money or to get him to buy cigarettes and blah, blah, blah. And the second doesn't need him anymore, even though they seem to have been friends for years. He'll just drop him and won't speak to him because he doesn't want to be associated with that person.
Fucking nuts. Yeah, that's pretty intense.